Right now, if your room gets a little chilly, you do one thing. You turn the thermostat dial. A quiet click echoes, and within a few minutes, the problem is gone. For you, warmth is a default setting of life, but for 99% of our species' history, that click did not exist. Imagine the world 20,000 years ago. A sheet of ice 2 kilometers thick sits right where London and New York stand today. The temperature drops to -40. This isn't the kind of cold a winter coat can save you from. This is a killing frost, where exposed skin dies in 3 minutes. And in the middle of this, white hell stands a small group of creatures. They don't have thick fur like bears, no thick layer of blubber like walruses. Biologically, this is a bald, sweating tropical primate born under the scorching sun of Africa. By all laws of nature, they should have frozen to death on the very first night, but they survived. And the fact that you are breathing and watching this video right now proves that they won. Forget the fairy tales about wild cavemen from textbooks. In reality, our ancestors were brilliant engineers, architects, and tacticians, and the way they cheated death will permanently change the way you look at your own home. Let's destroy the biggest myth of the Ice Age. At the mention of ancient humans, you picture them in a cave. This is a lie. Caves were rarely used, and there was a deadly reason for that. They were already occupied. Cave lions, giant hyenas, and one-ton cave bears were looking for shelter from the exact same wind. Occupying a cave meant trying to evict a predator that considered it home. Archaeological digs are packed with human remains mixed with the bones of predators. Often, scientists don't fully know who lived there and who was dinner. Besides, there simply weren't enough caves for everyone. What do you do when there is nothing but flat, frozen steppe for thousands of kilometers around you? They started digging. At archaeological sites from Kostroma to southern France, researchers find strange pits. Their depth is always the same, strictly between 2 and 2.5 meters. Somehow, without thermometers, they discovered the law of geothermal mass. At this depth, the Earth maintains a stable temperature that is 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the freezing air above. The planet itself became their heating system. They built roofs out of branches and turf over these pits. But when even that wasn't enough, they built structures that baffle architects today. Before building the perfect home, humans needed to create the perfect spacesuit. Ice Age clothing wasn't just thrown on hides, it was a 3-layer insulating system that outperformed modern brands by tens of thousands of years. The first layer was the thin fur of an Arctic fox or hare, stitched with the fur facing inward against the body. It created an air pocket and trapped skin heat. The second layer was dried moss and grass, which worked like a membrane, absorbing and wicking away excess moisture. The third, outer layer was the heavy hide of a deer or mammoth, treated with animal fat for absolute wind and water protection. All of this clothing was tightly fitted, but to sew it, a technology was required that changed the world: a bone needle with an eye. Carving a razor-thin needle out of a piece of bone and piercing a microscopic hole in it with a stone tool was a work of jewelry, requiring hours of concentration. But the needle allowed the seams to be airtight. Without it, people would have frozen. These groups had highly sophisticated logistics. They kept track of hides, tendons, and threads months before the first frost. A single miscalculation meant the entire tribe died. But the most incredible monument of ancient engineering was discovered in Mezhyrich and Kostenki, architectural structures built entirely from the bones of mammoths. Imagine a domed house 5 meters in diameter. Instead of a foundation, massive mammoth skulls weighing nearly 100 kilograms are lined up in a perfect circle. The walls are made of tightly fitted ribs and pelvic bones, wedged into each other without any mortar. The roof is a framework of interwoven 3-meter tusks covered with layers of sewn hides. A single house like this required the remains of 95 mammoths. Moving, sorting, and assembling tens of tons of these bones required colossal social organization. But inside lay the main secret. There was no wood for fires in the steppes. Therefore, the people of the Ice Age invented bone fuel. They crushed large tubular bones, extracting the marrow and soaked them in fat. This mixture burned incredibly long, releasing a colossal amount of heat. Moreover, these houses had ventilation. Air ducts near the ground drew in oxygen, while an opening in the dome expelled steam and carbon dioxide. Without this, moisture from breathing would freeze on the walls, and the house would collapse under its own weight from the inside. Scientists' experiments proved that when it was -30 outside, the bone house easily maintained +20 inside. But heating a home is only half the battle. To survive in the cold, a human needs 4 to 5,000 calories a day. There is no vegetation. The only source of energy is the fat and meat of giants. In movies, we are shown hunters throwing spears at a mammoth. In 2024, researchers from Berkeley proved this is physically impossible. The force of a human throw is never enough to pierce 10 centimeters of a mammoth's hide, fur, and subcutaneous fat to damage vital organs. So, how did they kill them? They forced the mammoths to kill themselves. Hunters used the grounded spear tactic. They took a heavy shaft, buried it deep into the frozen ground at an angle, and waited for the attack. A furious 6-ton mammoth, charging at a human at a speed of 25 kilometers per hour, impaled itself on this point. The force of its own momentum was 67 times more powerful than any human throw. The special design of the flint tip worked like a bullet with a shifted center of gravity. Once inside the body, the tip detached from the shaft and began to rotate chaotically in the wound from the animal's movements, expanding the internal bleeding. The hunters only had to wait. They used pure physics against muscle mass. But the most terrifying enemy was the darkness. Winter in the Eurasian steppe meant 16 hours of absolute black night, day after day. People were trapped in cramped bone houses for long months. In such conditions, the brain inevitably faces cognitive overload and depression, and our ancestors rewired their consciousness. In 1992, scientists found out that without artificial light, humans automatically return to an ancient biphasic sleep. They didn't sleep for 8 hours straight, but in 2 blocks of 4 hours. In the middle of the night, between the first and second sleep, there was a 2-hour period of wakefulness. During this time, the brain secreted elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone released today during meditation. People didn't experience panic. They stayed awake in a state of absolute tranquility. Around the fire, in this deep silence, humanity was truly born. While during the day conversations were about work and coordination, at night most talks turned into storytelling, myths about the stars, stories about ancestors, the transmission of critical knowledge about geography and poisons. Stories by the fire were not entertainment out of boredom, they were a psychological shield that saved the tribe's mind from destruction. The Ice Age ended. The glaciers retreated, the mammoths disappeared, and the bone palaces turned to dust. But this great freeze permanently changed evolution. Your body still remembers this war for survival. When you suddenly wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. for no apparent reason and experience inexplicable anxiety, it's not a malfunction in your body. It's your ancient software reminding you that the time for midnight wakefulness has come. Time to check if the fire has gone out and if a predator is creeping in the dark. When you feel an irresistible urge for the warmth of a fire and hanging out with friends, that's genetic memory speaking of times when isolation meant instant death from the cold. We haven't become smarter than those people. We just built a system that does all the heavy lifting for us, so the next time you reach for the thermostat in winter, pause for a second and remember those who walked through absolute ice and darkness so that you today could simply press a button. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the real history of humanity, the one they will never show you in the movies.